The excitement, stress, and exhilaration of the wedding had been overwhelming and exhausting. Both Elaine and Nicholas were keen to get the honeymoon started. A few nights away, in the idyllic village of West Titherley in the Test Valley of Hampshire, was exactly what the couple needed. The farmhouse they had rented was circuitously hidden away in a patch of tall trees. When they drove up to it, it didn't exactly match the online photos. It was obviously once a beautiful country home, but age and lack of maintenance had taken its toll. The paint was peeling from the exterior, and the garden was overgrown. But it was quiet and dog-friendly, so it suited the couple just fine. Apollo, the pair's trusty Anatolian shepherd, clambered out of the car and ran up to the front door. As he scratched, paint and splinters of wood willingly freed themselves from the frame. After a hearty nudge, the large dog pushed the door wide open. It obviously wasn't locked or properly closed. The house was dark, musty, and dated. But it was mostly clean, and it was charming. The family spent the day walking, chatting about the wedding, the guests, the bridesmaid's dress mishap, and Uncle Stuart, who was way too drunk by the time the speeches had rolled around. In the evening, Nicholas set about making a roaring fire in the cozy sitting room. The couple sipped whiskey and listened to Billie Holiday until the need to settle down for the night drew the pair upstairs. It had been a long day, and Elaine had decided a hot bath before bed would be just the ticket. Apollo was growling menacingly at the bathroom door, scratching furiously at the floor as though he was going to claw under the door itself. When Elaine opened the door and revealed an empty bathroom, Apollo barked ferociously, gnashed his teeth, and all of his hair stood bristled upright. "What's the matter, buddy?" Elaine asked as she stepped into the empty space. Apollo quickly grabbed at her top with his teeth, pulling her out of the bathroom. "Nicholas, I think Apollo is scared of the bathroom," Elaine called downstairs. "He probably thinks you're just going to torture him with a bath," Nicholas shouted up at her. "I'll put him in the kitchen to cool down for a bit." It was a colossal task, pulling the massive dog down the stairs. He was desperately trying to keep Elaine out of the bathroom. "I've never seen him act like this," Elaine said. "It's just a new space. It's been a weird few days for the old man. Let's let him settle down for a bit." The bathroom was full of swirling tendrils of steam as bubbles and the scent of lavender drifted dreamily up from the overflowing clawfoot tub. Candles lit the dark bathroom and enveloped the space with a warm orange glow. Nicholas popped a bottle of champers as the two sank into the warm, inviting water. The pair sat facing one another, chatting quietly, drinking from the bottle. Apollo's cries from the kitchen were drowned out by the Bluetooth speaker, sounding the soulful tones of John Coltrane. All of a sudden, the water felt cool, the room drafty, and the candlelight was white and clinical. Nicholas stared at Elaine as she took a swig from the bottle. As the bottle came down, he could see they were not alone in the bathroom. Behind his bride was another woman, naked, wet, black eyes and stringy hair. As Elaine sat in the now chilly water, Nicholas watched as the woman began to wrap her black, filthy arms around his wife and plunge her deep into the depths of the bathtub. Hey friends, it's Becca. At the top of the year, I told you about my goals for 2024. My first goal is to do an episode on Dark Disney. I'm still working on that one. No chance any of you lovely listeners have any leads for me? Goal number 2 was to grow our Patreon, a place where for as little as $1, €1, £1 a month, you can gain access to loads of additional West London Witch content and feel good about supporting 2 bespoke content creators. And my third goal was to share the West London Witch across more platforms, such as YouTube. And I am so excited and happy to announce that that goal has finally been fulfilled. It would mean the world to me if you wouldn't mind checking out the West London Witch YouTube channel, subscribing, and giving the first episode a like and even a comment. It's totally free, and it really helps the show. And if you're looking to unlock a treasure trove of additional content, go ahead and join us on Patreon. It's fun, affordable, and helps keep the show alive. I will keep you all posted on how my goals progress, but for now, I am thrilled to announce that the West London Witch YouTube channel is officially up and running. Hello and welcome to the West London Witch, a podcast where we share stories about those moments where we find ourselves very much not alone. Today's episode is a very different type of episode for the West London Witch. If you're new here or tuning in for the first time, it's worth knowing that we are primarily a long-form narrative podcast. Each episode ranges from 25 to 45 minutes and features one story, place, or storyteller. However, most people's interactions with the paranormal are short and isolated. Jacob Rice described this phenomenon best in episode 48, Boo Moments. In that episode, he described these moments as frightful yet fleeting encounters with the other side. I have conducted well over 100 interviews for the West London Witch. However, we only have 64 episodes in our repertoire. So, what about all the other stories? Well, in all honesty, some just don't quite work for our setup. But the main reason why a story doesn't make it into an episode is because they are simply too short for our structure. But today, I thought I would dust off some of my favorite short yet scary stories. These stories are from all over the world, are set in different places, and are not connected in any way. But they're all too good to just sit around on my hard drive collecting dust. I even added in a personal story of my own, a boo moment at its finest. I'm Rebecca Strazina, and this is the West London Witch, episode 65, Tales from the West London Witch Crypt. Chapter 1, Spook Lights.
It was Christmas Eve in Hickory, North Carolina, my hometown. I was moving to right outside of Asheville, North Carolina, the very next day into a cabin on the side of Mount Mitchell. So I was sorting everything out. Christmas Eve night, I was leaving a job. So I was driving out to my boss's house to drop off all the keys. I'm driving out there. It's like 8:30 at night on Christmas Eve. And I'm just driving down the road, listening to music. And all of a sudden, this orange ball of light about the size of a cantaloupe flies right in front of my car. But like, when I say that, it was like an inch from my windshield. It flew right in front of my windshield, right in front of my eyes. And I was like, oh my God, like, what is that? I have no idea.
Shane was stunned and amazed. Immediately, he pulled his car to the side, off of the road, determined to figure out what he had just witnessed.
I pull over to the side of the road. I get out of my car, and I'm in like on the side of a road in a field, there were 12 of these giant orange balls of light right in front of me, just there. And this is like, some of them were like 5 feet away. Some of them were like a little bit further out, but they all came together and they were just there.
There Shane stood, confounded and mesmerized. He tried to rack his brain as to what he could be seeing. He first thought maybe they could be lanterns, but they were behaving so strangely, as if they'd had their own autonomy.
So I see, well, I'll just look at one and see what I can, study it. And so I would look at these things and they almost look like objects. And you could see like the guts of a light bulb or something like that. So I'm like, okay, maybe they're objects. But then as soon as I would think that, they would blink out into nothing. So there would be nothing there. So it was just light, self-generated light. And I'm just like, oh my God, like my mind's blown.
As Shane continued to gaze upon the lights, he noticed that each light had its own personality. He was instantly reminded of Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, each with their own archetypal characteristics.
Some were like stoic and just stayed where they were, and some were like wistfully shooting around, playing,
But the main thing was that Shane was not scared, worried, or fearful at all.
I was not afraid. I was like in awe. It was awesome. To me, it was awesome. So I just stood there and watched them. And after a few minutes, it was kind of like, okay, we're going to go now. And they just went in a line and flew over the field and all blinked out into nothing. And that was it.
Shane treasured this experience. But after a few years, it was simply stored away in the recesses of his mind. Until one day, when he realized the magnitude and the strangeness of the situation.
One day, a few years ago, I was just like, wow, like that's really intense. And then I started researching more about these lights and getting a better perspective on them throughout history. I was looking at UFO reports from the same night, and these same thing was seen all over the country at the same time. In California, Tennessee, Colorado, all of these orange balls of light, and some of them said 12, just like me, were seen all over the country the same night, same time. Same descriptions is what I saw all over the country.
Shane's further musings and research didn't really provide him with answers, but rather a lot more questions.
And I call them spook lights just because the old term that's used around here in the South, I like using it. Years later, my mom told me there's another spook light story in the family. My great grandmother passed away, and the night she died, one of these balls of light flew out of the house into the sky. And my great grandmother was there to witness it. It was just, especially here in the South, 100 years ago, it was just understood that these things were the souls of people. The more I look into this stuff, the further back you go, and it's always been with us.
Shane doesn't pretend to know all the answers. He's done a lot of research and a lot of self-reflection, and he enjoys the process of trying to figure out what he saw, and then finding a reason why that just couldn't be so. And perhaps that's what makes this story so magical, the element of the unknown. Chapter 2, Paranormal Pediatrics.
Years ago, I was a nurse in a local hospital, and I worked on the children's ward, and I had to do some stints of nights. quite regularly. This one particular night, it was a quiet day and a quiet night, and about 11 p.m, I was sitting at the nurse's station just writing out some charts because that was one of my jobs for the evening. I could see the whole length of the ward where I was sitting, both up and down, left and right. And at the left side of the ward, there was a big corridor with a big light stretched to the rest of the hospital. And I saw something as I was writing out the corner of my eye, like you do when it's dark at night time. So I leaned back in my chair and I looked up and I could see a child. Now, as this was a paediatric ward, that wasn't unusual. So I looked up, and as I saw this child, there was a big pillar right in the middle of the ward that went right through the hospital, and she was leaning out by the side of the pillar. And the light was behind her, so I didn't see any facial features or anything like that. But I could see that she had blonde hair in braids or plaits, whichever you like to call it, with a red ribbon. And the blonde plait swung out to the side like this. She was wearing a blue dressing gown. It was all very normal little child, out of bed at 11 o'clock. And I thought, oh, who's that? So I thought I'd better go and have a look. As I was walking up, I was trying to think of all the children we had on the ward, and she didn't fit any description of the children we had on the ward, which I thought was quite unusual. But I still went and had a look at her because she might have been a child on her own. When I got there, she wasn't there. I couldn't see her. Underneath where the pillar was, there was a little play cottage, a little playhouse, where all the children used to play if they were well enough. Looked in there, she wasn't in there. Looked at all of the rooms, long corridor. Couldn't find her anywhere. So I went into the office. I thought she must have come from one of the other children's wards. Well, that came to a blank. Nobody knew who she was. So then I thought maybe she's a visitor. And I rang down the main reception saying, look, I've seen a child on the ward, described her. If you've got anybody missing, she was on this ward at this time. Nothing. So it was a real puzzle. So I went back to my nurse's station to continue my work, and I spoke to the nurse in charge, lovely lady. And when I described her, she said, you've seen Lucy. Now, Lucy was a little girl who'd been poorly on the ward and had died on the ward. And her favourite place was the cottage underneath the stairs, underneath the pillar, where she used to play. So there was no scariness about it. There was no fear. When I found out, I felt privileged that I'd actually seen her, because not many people did. She had passed away about 10 years previously, and she was still there. She was still there playing in the cottage.
Chapter 3. It's connected to the children.
So when I was 5 years old, my family moved from Courtenay, British Columbia to Vancouver Island, and we moved to the ground floor of my aunt and uncle's farmhouse. The farmhouse stretches on 3 acres and was built in the 1930s. The original ground floor of the house wasn't finished. My uncle actually finished it in anticipation for us coming to live there. The house had my aunt, uncle, my 2 cousins upstairs, and me and my brother and my parents. My brother and I ate upstairs fairly often, as my family had us quite young and would often work nights. Our cousins were more like siblings. All 4 of us were 4 years apart, and given that young and sometimes angsty energy in the house, ghosts were very active. The house only had 2 owners, a couple who had originally purchased the home, had their kids there, watched them grow up and move out, and eventually one of them would pass away there. His name was George.
Alicia's aunt and uncle were aware of George's passing when they bought the home, but it wasn't an issue for them. People die in their homes all the time.
So let's go back to the late 90s. My younger brother is 6, I'm 10, and my cousins upstairs are 14 and 18. While my aunt and uncle rarely saw the strange happenings, they knew that there was a particular energy in the house. They would often chalk it up to George, the friendly ghost. Usually, it was just George, but like I said, there was a darker energy. It was often felt at the end of the hallway, where the linen closet was. It was at the end of the hall between my aunt and uncle's bedroom and my eldest cousin's room. And it wasn't so much of a closet as it was a creepy little crawl space with a tiny door. The door didn't actually latch. The handle was just for show. And this was the corner of choice for timeouts. Every time I went down there, it was the longest and most terrifying 10 minutes of my life. I used to beg to be put in another corner, and the grown-ups never understood why. I would hear whispers coming from inside the closet, think Pennywise in the sewer drains, and it was also freezing down there. Not to mention that I would feel the occasional hand push my face further into the corner.
The closet door was always supposed to be closed, but oftentimes the family would come home to find it wide open.
Now, we were the type of family that would eat dinner at the dinner table every night. The layout of the house is very boxed off. It was the 1930s. There was the kitchen, a room in between the living room and the kitchen where my uncle had his work desk. He has his own landscaping business, and that work desk would face the hallway that went to the bedrooms. During dinner, if the phone would ring, obviously, we wouldn't answer it. But on more than one occasion, the receiver on the phone would be off, or a scratchy, angry whisper would come through the voicemail. Even though I was very young, I sensed that whatever voice was coming through this answering machine was the same energy in the hallway. Now let's go back to George for a minute. My aunt and uncle are the type of people that also drink milk with their dinner. Controversial today, I know. We later learned that George was lactose intolerant because every now and again, the milk glasses on the dinner table would just tip over without being touched. And on one instance, it actually exploded to the point that my uncle went around checking for gunshot holes in the kitchen window.
George's opinions were not just limited to the family's choice of beverages, but he also had opinions on how they lived their lives, what time they needed to go to bed, and what they watched on television.
Candles in the living room would light and burn out on their own, and the TV would shut off at 10 p.m. every night. My aunt would laugh and say, "George, it's not my bedtime. This may have been yours," and would continue to stay up watching movies. But just like clockwork, every night at 10 p.m., the TV would shut off.
But not all of the ghostly nighttime encounters were quite as playful and good-natured.
When my great-grandma passed away, she had left beautiful music boxes for my two cousins and myself, and she had gotten my brother an antique toy truck. We each had a unique music box that kind of aligned with who we were. My music box in particular was the kind that you had to wind up on the back and open it, and a tiny little ballerina would spin around inside. I was a dancer, so it made sense. But at least once a week, in the middle of the night, this music box would start playing.
This was so terrifying and upsetting. Alicia would cry and cry in her room, and eventually, her mom took the music box away, and she still does not have possession of it to this very day. As Alicia had previously mentioned, her family lived on the bottom floor of the farmhouse. A staircase connected the two parts of the home.
Well, we liked to slide down the stairs on our butts as kids. I'm sure you did the same thing. And one day we decided to up the ante and use a laundry basket to surf down the stairs. The stairs were old wooden stairs, and at the bottom it would turn to go down to the basement suite. Well, not very smart. I was unsuccessful in my surf one day, and I knew that my face was going to be hitting that wall before turning. But much to everybody's surprise, the laundry basket stopped, just before the bottom of the stairs and was like hovering on the staircase. My cousins stood there shocked, and I knew I had George to thank for saving me from a broken nose. While he could be a pest at times, ultimately he did bring good energy, and I think protected us. Now, for a period of time after we grew up and moved out, the energy in the house seemed to stop. That was until my cousins had kids of their own. Now, my aunt and uncle play grandparents, and they have a whole new group of kids there. Interestingly, the activity has kind of started up again. My eldest cousin, has twins that are 6 years old now, a boy and a girl. And I often will find Oakland, the girl, staring down the hallway. She too hates going down there. The bathroom is in that hallway. She never wants to go to the bathroom by herself. So I think whatever used to torment me in that hallway as a kid also troubles her.
Chapter 4. The Room at the End of the Hall.
My mother and I moved to an old Victorian house when I was just 5 years old. Now, I probably need to describe the layout of the house first, and what I remember was that it was a terrace, and downstairs it was just one room wide with a corridor that gave access from front to back. To me, the house seemed to go on forever as you walked from the front of the house to the back, with doors leading off to your right-hand side, revealing yet another room. In reality, it probably wasn't that big, but when you're only 5 years old, everything seems so much bigger. The stairs were in the middle of the house. There's nothing unusual in that. At the front of the house, there was a large living room, and another large room at the back of the house. And it was this room, at the very back of the house, that bothered me. Now, this was more than 60 years ago, but I still remember the nightmare, the same nightmare which regularly woke me up from my sleep. In my dream, I was about to go to bed, and I was dressed in my dressing gown and walking towards my aunt who was visiting, just to say goodnight. And then I trip on my dressing gown belt, and as I land on the floor, I look through the door, and I look down that long corridor to the other end of the house. And there, stood at the door at the back of the room, is a figure with an enormous round head that glowed a brilliant white. The rest of the nightmare was always the same. The figure was walking slowly towards me along that long corridor. And my dilemma, my choices were either to stay in the room and simply accept my fate, whatever that may be, or should I run toward the apparition in the hope that I can reach the stairs in the middle of the corridor before that glowing figure reached the top of the stairs and prevented my escape? I do not remember if I ever escaped. I probably woke up and saved myself from making a choice. But it was that room, the room at the back of our house, that has something very disturbing to tell me. Just a few years later, that room actually became my bedroom, and for the most part, everything seemed fine. There was just this one time when I woke up and looked toward the door, and I was convinced I saw a hand just reaching into the room. That was all. It was just a hand. And it was a long time ago. I can't believe I would have been happy continuing to sleep in there, but I guess I must have. It was many years later that I was talking to my mother about that room, long after we'd moved from the house. It was only then that she told me the story of the room. It seemed that the house had been in the family for some time before we'd moved in. And in that room, some member of the family, I can't recall who, had lived there as a recluse, in that room, never leaving the room where he died. And maybe, just maybe, his spirit lived on, and maybe in my nightmare, he even tried to leave the room.
Chapter 5, Cobweb Cottage. My husband Kyle and I live in a little old cottage in the country that we affectionately call Cobweb Cottage. From the outside, the home looks like the quintessential haunted witch's house nestled away quietly in the woods. This cottage was built in the early 1800s and has such beautiful and thoughtful finishing features. It is clear that whoever built this home truly loved it. We moved in during COVID, and the whole process was so rushed and shrouded in PPE and social distancing that we hadn't actually spent much time viewing the home. We didn't even realize it had a laundry room until the day we moved in. But we had wondered about how the house would feel. It looked spooky, but that didn't necessarily mean that it was spooky. The first night we spent in the cottage, our dog Nala ran directly upstairs and began to happily prance around the front bedroom, the room we call the morning room. We were elated to see that Nala was comfortable in the home. If there were spirits in the house, they were obviously okay with animals, and that was the most important thing to Kyle and I. It did take a few weeks to adjust to the house. We soon realized that the knocking in the bathroom was in fact the pipes running through the hall closet. The intermittent, eerie glow from the master bedroom fireplace was a CO2 monitor that someone had shoved deep into the back of the hearth. The creaking on the stairs was just a loose floorboard on the third step. All explainable and totally characteristic of an over 200-year-old house. However, there were some things we couldn't explain. I had had all of the electrics and wiring in the home evaluated before we moved in. A clean bill of health was administered. So imagine my irritation one sunny afternoon when I was in the upstairs office editing and one of the wall sconces began flickering and making a terrible humming noise. Swiftly, I pulled out my phone to record the faulty light. I wanted to send evidence to the electricians. But as I stood there, indignantly gathering evidence of poor workmanship, I noticed Nala. She was prostrate on the floor, frozen rigid, and her eyes were so wide I could see the white surrounding them. She was staring at the light. All of a sudden, I had an overwhelming sensation that I was truly not alone. I asked the empty room to turn the light off if there was someone in the room. The light switched off and then back on again. I asked a second time if it wanted to talk. Once again, the light flickered off, then popped back on. The buzzing sound was so palpable, it felt as though it was running through my body. I felt electric, and it made me feel really uncomfortable. Suddenly, Nala was at my side, asking to be picked up. I pulled her into my arms, her tiny body shaking and trembling with fear. I told the room I was happy to talk, but could they please stop the buzzing as it was scaring me? Immediately, the light switched off, the buzzing subsided, Nala relaxed, and the room felt awash with an apologetic feeling, as though someone was saying, "I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to scare you." The next week, I called the electricians back in. Maybe it was just faulty wiring, but they swore it was fine, and it has never happened again. However, we do hear a lot of activity emitting from that room. Heavy footsteps, the sound of furniture being moved, invisible life happening in an empty space. If you're upstairs, sometimes you hear the same noises downstairs. But when you come down to check it out, there's no one there. I am a bit of an eco-warrior. I'm very conscientious of how much water and electricity we are using, what products we buy, and how we can do our part to be environmentally friendly. One of my biggest pet peeves is lights being left on in an empty room. Call it a carryover for being a child in the 90s in California during the Enron scandal. I am very good at turning off lights. Kyle, not so much. However, one autumn evening, I was making my way upstairs to put away some laundry when I could see light seeping out of our bedroom. The door was open ajar and the light was spilling onto the landing. I admit that I was instantly irritated until I remembered I was home alone, and I definitely did not leave that light on. I quietly and tentatively tiptoed up the remaining stairs and peeked through the crack where the door is hinged to the frame. Sitting on our bed was a thin, fragile old woman in a pale pink nightdress. Thin gray curls spilled over her shoulders and down her back. Her back was turned to me, and she appeared to be looking out the window. Although she was sitting on the bed, her feet and legs seemed to be going through the bed, as though she was sitting on a bed half the size of ours. She had a very confused energy about her, as though she didn't know where she was. I stood there, shocked, mouth gaping, arms full of fresh laundry. There was something intrusive about watching this woman through the crack in the door. I felt as though I was invading her personal space. Almost as though she could sense that she was being watched, she began to slowly turn around. I was so scared and taken aback that I quickly stepped backwards as though not to be seen, cracking my head on the door to the morning room in the process. The laundry laid in a heap at my feet as I quickly opened up the bedroom door to see the woman. But of course, she was gone. I have thought long and hard about this experience, and I do have a few theories. One is she could have been a previous resident or owner of the cottage. Maybe the reason she was sitting through the bed is because she was sitting on furniture that had once used to be in that room. Or maybe she's not connected to the cottage at all. Directly next door to the cottage is a 12th century church and graveyard. The church and graveyard are still there today, but I don't know how far the cemetery used to extend. There is a total possibility that the cottage sits on old church land. The woman was looking out the window towards the church. Maybe she was looking at her own grave. All I know is that in that moment of time, she was as real as me, and I was the ghost watching her. That concludes today's collection of tales from the West London Witch Crypt. Chapter 1, Spooklights, came to us from Shane from the Dark Notes podcast. Chapter 2, Paranormal Pediatrics, is a very special story as it comes to us from Allie, the mother of Lizzie Wilson, the creator of the West London Witch cover art. Chapter 3, It's Connected to the Children, was shared to us by Alicia from the Twisted and Uncorked podcast. Chapter 4, The Room at the End of the Hall, is one of my very favorite family stories, shared to us by my very own Uncle David. If you enjoyed Chapter 5, Cobweb Cottage, make sure you head on over to the West London Witch Instagram and Facebook so you can watch the actual video of the office light turning on and off. While you're over there, head on over to Shane's account, UFO Bigfoot, and Alicia's, the Twisted and Uncorked podcast, and show Alicia and Shane some love with a follow, and make sure to check out their shows. If you enjoyed today's opening monologue about the couple on their honeymoon, Make sure you head on over to the West London Witch Patreon to hear an interview with the couple that story is based off of. If you have your own boo moment you'd like to share, I would love to hear it. Drop me an email at thewestlondonwitch@gmail.com or find us on Instagram and Facebook at The West London Witch. If you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review. And come and follow us for additional content on Instagram and Facebook. Until next time, merry meet, merry part, and merry meet again. The West London Witch is created by me, Rebecca Strazina. Our sound designer and production magician is the incredible Danny Cross. Our theme music was bespokely written and performed by the wickedly talented Kyle Hall. Our cover art is the beautiful collaboration between Lizzie Wilson and Jake Bowser. Special thanks to Miss Sinead Bowers, our quality control and biggest cheerleader. And thank you to you, all of our listeners all over the world. These are your stories. Thank you for sharing them with us.